Ready? Play.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time it is in the world, wherever you are tuning in from. This is another one of these episodes looking back on the matches of the year on the ATP side. And in at number 6, we have Andrey Rublev against Holger Rune in Monte Carlo. And I'm pleased to be joined by Jack. Jack, how are you doing?
Good, thank you, John. Yeah, excited to get into this one. Thanks very much for having me on. Of course, definitely. Well, I'll get into why it's such a big match, but certainly Rublev for me, one of my favourite players in the tour. Rune, always exciting to watch. This should be a good one to get into. I'm excited.
When I was looking at sort of different matches to choose, there were on both the men's and the women's side, it was like, actually, I think pretty much 2 that are just obvious. You've got to go for those 2. And then there's like about 10 on both sides of the tour where there's maybe one more that you say, yeah, that should be there. But then the other sort of 4 slots that we had available, as we had on that Twitter Spaces last week, it was really tricky to choose. And what I have found, though, is that the matches that I've gone through so far, when I do watch them back, I'm like, yeah, I'm pleased that I've not had any regret yet whilst watching some of these matches back. In some ways, actually, the matches were even better. Now, I don't mean in terms of quality always, and we'll come to that with this match in particular, but in terms of drama, narrative, interest, and, by the way, plenty of quality too. There's just a couple of unforced errors that we're going to talk about that will end up dictating the match. What are your thoughts sort of 7 months on from this encounter?
Yeah, so narrative-wise, yeah, I think the most immediate thing I want to kind of broach is you look at the ATP top 50 or so, and there are 4 players who've got all these storylines, and they're the guys to talk about. But then what happened to the rest of the tour? I mean, who really sticks out as a guy with a story to tell? Even Rune. Like, what was Rune up to really for the entirety of the year? He wasn't really even playing second fiddle. Didn't contest for anything massive. I'll just chuck names at you. Obviously, Steph didn't have the greatest year. Zverev maybe with a bit of a renaissance, but even then wasn't contesting for big titles. Hurkacz, I mean, okay, Shanghai actually is a good story, so Hurkacz maybe is an exception to the rule.
I mean, Hurkacz and Rublev are in this sort of category beyond the Grand Slam finalists.
Yeah,
they are in the next category down. So
I actually think Hurkacz is very akin to Rublev in a lot of ways, and obviously it's no coincidence as well. Hurkacz was Rublev was the guy that Hurkacz beat in that Shanghai final as well. It does feel like they're quite paired up in that sort of way. But again, Hurkacz may be an exception to the rule. My point is, though, Ruud, Kachanov, Tifo, all of these guys that kind of were doing some big things the year before have kind of just been like completely absorbed by these 4 guys who are kind of hogging the limelight in a way. It's one of the strongest top 4 players we've seen in a while.
Yeah.
And for Rublev, the storylines were pretty gloomy, I guess, outside of this title, right? He didn't get past the quarterfinals again at Slam. He lost in Shanghai as well. That was the other really big match that he wanted to win. It was quite disappointing for him. But he has this. And for the rest of the tour, if you look at the rest of the tour and the fans who are, pining for a win for the rest of the tour, this is gold in an otherwise pretty barren wasteland of winless encounters, I would say. Rublev winning Monte Carlo is a fan favourite. It is huge for Rublev, despite the fact he didn't capitalise on it. If he hadn't got Monte Carlo this year, this would be a very disappointing year, I would say. But for him to get his first Masters title, John, that's huge. It was massive, and it still is huge. And it is big for the rest of the tour as well, is the point I'm trying to make.
I'm glad you touched on the sort of the big four for 2023 at least, because actually Rublev doesn't beat any of the big four, I don't think, in this tournament, and something therefore has to happen to the big four for possibly for even on clay for Rublev to win this title. And of course, those things that happened include Alcaraz not playing through injury. He had the sunshine double where he got to won one of them and got to the semis in the other, and then decided to have a couple of weeks off as a result of Miami exertions. And so that helps. We had, Medvedev on clay, which at that time in the year we didn't know was going to be a force du jour. We didn't realize until Rome, but we'll come to that maybe some other day. And then, of course, we had Sinner, who you're obviously including now in the big four, but this was a pre-September Sinner in a way that we knew, could get there one day, but we just didn't know when. And that day sort of arrival and really announcing himself as a big player on the tour was post US Open. And the other one, because there is another one amongst the big four, Novak Djokovic. Can you remember what happened to him in Monte Carlo?
Musetti beat him, right?
Musetti.
Lorenzo Musetti beat him. The Monte Carlo bug has been a thing for Novak for a little while.
But he's not always done well. Or he's not done well in recent years in Monte Carlo. Yeah. I remember him losing to Dan Evans there, among others, and Davidovich Fokina, I think. So it has always been. It's the first clay court tournament for him. He takes probably a little bit more to get up and running on clay than he does on a hard court in particular, or grass actually. And then, of course, he does run into Musetti. And I think he had some elbow issues as well. Yeah. Musetti played really well, nothing taken away. So that's what happens to those four players that does then give this chance for a Rublev, a Rune, or a Khachanov. But hats off to Rublev because he was there to take advantage whilst others weren't.
Yeah. I think the crowning stat is there have been 10 Masters plus ATP finals this year, 4 Grand Slams, 14 big events, and 2 winners outside of those 4 names, right? And of course, one of them, Hubert Hurkacz, as mentioned, and the other one right here, Andrey Rublev. So that is the slim pickings we're talking about. 2 big titles up for grabs for the rest of the tour, and one of them was Rublev. So he did, that's maybe all you need to know before we dive into this. And it's the reason it takes a spot so high on the list, because not only did it show the rest of the tour, got something, at least they have this to cling on to. But Rublev's such a lovable guy. It was a win that was just desperately needing to happen for so long. Everybody, he's such an affable chap. Everybody's such a big fan of him. Fan favourite win title of the year, probably, I would imagine.
This, of course, was one of the 3 matches that were posted in a poll, along with Struff against Alcaraz in Madrid and Medvedev Sinner in Beijing. So this is one of the 3 matches that made it. So it actually won the poll quite comfortably. And it probably does suggest the number of Rublev fans out there over necessarily the looking at the matches in comparison. Possibly Struff doesn't quite have the same following, for example. But I think it is worthy of a spot. I understand, certainly Damien and others, Carlos as well. Both, that's Carlos, the magician on Twitter, not Carlos Alcaraz. Both suggested that Rune and Sinner, the semi-final, was probably of a high level and probably would have been in their top 7. Fair enough. There is an argument for that, definitely. I just think that the excitement of this match, being a final, being a 1,000 and being Rublev's first. And as you said, the longer it goes on, you start to wonder, if maybe it'll ever happen. You know, let's just say he goes another 18 months without winning a 1,000 or higher, or goes another 18 months without making a semi-final of a slam, which is still a pursuit of his. You know, the longer it goes on, the longer you start. You know, Tsitsipas, similar, different in terms of his goal is maybe slightly higher, even certainly amongst us. But the longer it goes on, the more doubts start to creep in. And when doubts creep in with Rublev, we do see some unfortunate consequences.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the biggest factors here, at least. Let's just do a little quick comparison between the Shanghai final and the Monte Carlo final. He had
tight. Both were super tight.
Both were super tight. Exactly. He had cause to lose his temper in both matches. Monte Carlo, he's always going to have a chat with the team. He has never ever, I think, lost a set and not had some sort of reaction. But compared to Shanghai, he was cool, calm, and collected. You know, he was chatting to the team, but he came straight out and he broke Rune straight away. There was no hangover from the first set. He just got on with business, and he was down a lot. And well, we're going to get into all of this, but he was down in the third set in the match as well. You know, there was a lot of cause just to kind of throw in the towel, feel like you're defeated, and he just kept plugging away. And obviously, you see the results. You know, he never actually struck himself, which is something he has done. Obviously, it sounds silly, but at the same time, it's a big deal. It's not something to be taken lightly, because if somebody's self-harming themselves in the court, other people, will look up to that idol, think that's okay. It's really not. It's not great. It's not a way to conduct yourself in court at all. And I actually don't know why legislation of rules and regulations don't kind of put some sort of unsportsmanlike conduct behind
it's
that.
Difficult, it's difficult. It's like breaking into your own home apparently is a crime.
Yeah, but it's like breaking a racket, right? So what breaking a racket would be racket abuse, self-abuse. Self-abuse warning, Mr. Rublev, should be the way that's dealt with, genuinely. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked there. Point is, he didn't do that in Monte Carlo. You see the results. It was so beautiful not to see him implode, and his fans obviously were like feeling the same way. He had so much cause to feel like he was down in that match, feel like it was chances squandered. He kept his cool and came out the other side of it a champion. It was great to see.
Yeah. Let's get into the match and how it panned out, because there were plenty of ups and downs. There's plenty of parallel and alternative universes out there where Rune does win this match, that's for sure, because there were so many ways that he could have won this match. There's nothing, that's often the case with it when a match is this close, that both players probably could have won it in 2 or 3 different ways, and maybe Rune could have won it in even more different ways. Rune was really in charge of the first set. I think he could have easily gone up a double break. He let Rublev off the hook in some really important rallies where he's so far up, but Rublev defended incredibly in some of those. And in fact, I think that Rublev did break back before ultimately Rune ends up having to sort of snatch that first set, if you like. Anything you want to add regarding the first set?
Yeah. I think it was pretty obvious from the get-go that Rublev was getting pretty flustered by the Rune drop shot. Of course, the drop shot itself has made a bit of a renaissance in the wake of this player, Rune, and Carlos Alcaraz, of course. And Novak Djokovic as well, who kind of added it to his arsenal as part of his clay court game in the latter years. Uses it quite a lot now. It's quite a big reason he's so successful in it in the latter stage of his career. Anyway, you could kind of see Rublev wasn't able to pull the same trick against Rune. It did feel like it was actually quite a big factor in the match. It wasn't just a little add-on. It was something that was kind of when they were neck and neck in the rallies, was making the difference for Rune. It was just about execution. So honestly, okay, the first set went the way it did for Rune. It was pretty nip and tuck, but I felt like it was kind of in Rune's hands from that first set. It felt like it was up to Rune to dictate the match, and maybe in a way that's kind of how it went. But there's the other thing I want to add to that though. Rublev was a little more passive than he normally is, for better, not for worse. So for the entirety of the tournament, his backhand cross court had been so solid, and I'm sure there's stats on it. I think I did dig out some stats for it at the time. Go check out the podcast then, if you like, plug away. Why don't I? He definitely hit a higher percentage of backhands cross court than down the line. He does like to change it up. He is capable of doing that. The reason he changes it up, of course, if you go down the line with your backhand with enough quality, you're probably more likely to get a forehand to the next shot. So if you want to break up the pattern and start to get your forehand back into play, the big weapon of Rublev's game, you go down the line. And he didn't do that. He was pretty comfortable trading over and over and over again. You kind of feel like if he'd played Daniel in the final of Monte Carlo with these kind of tactics, with this sort of confidence that he had that week, he would have had a really good chance. Because obviously backhands cross court, that's where Medvedev gets Rublev like every single day of the week. But he just looked so solid. And although he looked a bit more passive, and although Rune was the one that had to kind of change things up and dictate play, it was to Rublev's benefit, is what I'm trying to say. So, he was making Rune play a little bit outside of the box, which eventually came pretty good as we moved into the second set, of course, where things started to kind of get a bit wobbly for Holger.
Yeah. And it sort of began that way at the beginning of the second set. Rublev gets an early break. In fact, this set was actually full of breaks of serve, which, of course, we see a lot more on the clay. And so Rublev does get an early break. Goes up to love, which is quite important in that it sort of stems the flow. If you go down a set and an early break, then it's a long way back. But Rublev does seize the early advantage, despite the disappointment of losing that first set. But then Rune breaks back immediately, and probably at this point you're thinking, okay, I mean, momentum and all the rest of it. Okay, it's still only 2-2, but clearly it's with the Dane. And then we saw the first of two, at least. Sensational lobs.
Oh, he's made it.
From Andrey Rublev. We'll see a third one, in particular from him in the third set as well. That actually also helps him break. But of course, the other thing that helps him get a double break, as it turned out in this set, this is for Rublev, of course, was a double fault from Rune.
Oh, wow. It's almost like he's just checked out of this set here, Rune.
So now it's 5-2 to Rublev with a double break, and he ends up closing that set out pretty comfortably. That's sort of the nuts and bolts of the set, that he wins 6-2. What would you like to add, and maybe even flesh it out with Jack?
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit of relativity to those lobs, right? So I feel like if you see Andy Murray lob somebody and it's a beautiful shot, you go, well, that's a great shot. But Andy Murray could do that 7 days of the week, right? But you see Andrey Rublev do it with a little bit of variety, and for what goes on to be the biggest title of his career. It's a bigger deal, I think. I think there's a relativity to some of the shots you see sometimes, and it kind of does make it a bit more like, oh my God, wow, that came out of nowhere. So if if it was Holger Rune versus John Silk in the Monte Carlo final, and John Silk starts, lacing forehands past Holger Rune, you go, what is going on here?
Yeah.
This is
alternative universe.
This is amazing.
Even more so if it was backhands, by the way. I'm not going to do the forehand either, but if there's going to be one of my two shots, it'll be the backhand that would be course great.
But you get my point. It's almost like when it defeats expectation, it's more exciting, it's more dramatic, and there was a bit of that. There was variety going on from Rublev, and obviously to the more trained eye, there was a lot more passiveness, ergo consistency from Rublev than we're used to as well. So the whole thing was very out of the ordinary from him, and kind of made it a bigger. It probably was his best match of the year, despite the fact it was a little scrappy in some places. For me, I think it was, because it was such a big result in the end, and there was a lot of cause to get nervy and start to feel like you were panicking in your game plan. But he just stuck to it. He plugged away. He didn't change it at any point, and eventually it came good.
I think another reason why it would just add to his best week of the year, just aside from the fact he won the 1000, but even just in terms of the way he played, was because he had to battle. he had to come through some really tough moments in the week, none more so than the final, as we've already highlighted. But actually, that's something that he did throughout the week, coming from a set down. I think we said beforehand, it was in 3 matches that week that he was a set down to come back and win. And the final is another example of that, and that's even harder against an even better player, Holger Rune. So there's some of the mental demons, of course, are often likely to occur in some of the tightest of moments, and that's when the breakdown might occur. But actually, Rublev fought through that and with great success in Monte Carlo.
Yeah. I think maybe there's also another perspective. I'd just add, just for devil's advocate, maybe this is something we should have been talking about post third set, but it's on my mind now. Is the fact that Rublev's backhand's not actually a weakness in his game. It's maybe just a relative weakness, right? So you put him up against 90% of the top 100, and the backhand doesn't really look that loose. But then you put him up against Novak Djokovic, Daniel Medvedev. That's when he starts to press a bit, and things kind of unravel a bit. So it's not his backhand's good. It's a good backhand, and he can go line on it pretty well, and he's shown that in pretty big matches. And so even kind of pressed here, I guess. Well, in fact, I think the point is Holger Rune didn't really press as much as he should have been pressing, right? And there was an element of Rune's backhand should have been doing better, and it just wasn't. So whether that was physicality, which again we'll get into,
a lot of people have touched on that, because of the difficult semi-final that Rune had, and it was late at night, I think, or late-ish by Monte Carlo standards, and that week had a bit of rain as well, so there were certain matches that were put back and delayed, and I think that semi-final that Rune had was rain hit against Sinner, and Damien, I know, certainly subscribes to the idea that Rune was suffering in the third set.
Yeah. Should we start talking about that third set then? Because I mean, this is where this is the nuts and bolts of the match. Really, this is where it was all made, right? Because obviously Rublev goes into the third set with all the momentum, and it kind of just gets robbed from underneath him. Can you remember any of those big points in that first 3 games where Rune went up 3-0?
Oh, funnily, you should ask me that, Jack, and it's not because we just watched the highlights before we click record. But yes, I do recall them from 7 or 8 months ago. So yeah, I mean, the beginning of the third set, it's Rune who draws first blood and goes into a 3-love and then ultimately 4-1 lead.
So Rune backs up the break.
And again, that's probably the final thing. I mean, I'm actually almost getting a nice feeling in my heart as I mention this. It's probably the final thing that rubber stamps this in the top 7 for me, because you've got a guy coming from 4-1 down in the third set. It's pretty cool, and especially when you add in the fact that Rune had chances for a double break, to go up 5-1, and then he's basically on the verge of serving for the match. So yeah, for those reasons, I think Rublev does manage to hold, though, in that 2-4 game, or 1-4 to make it 2-4, despite being close to going a double breakdown. Rune had a break point, for example, at 4-1 for him, if you like, where it's a good first serve from Rublev, but I would still expect Rune to make that more often than not. It does land out. It's pretty close. But Rune, you can see, is frustrated with himself with that return.
I think if we're being honest, he should have made it.
Yeah, probably.
I think he should. I think he should.
As you said, it's a forced, officially it's a forced error, but he probably should have at least landed it in. And even just landing it in and you're sort of 60-40 down in the rally, that's fine on clay, especially on opponent's serve. But he doesn't, and he's annoyed. And Rublev basically does manage to hold in maybe the biggest hold of his year in many respects, compared to where he was in terms of him being in a hole. And again, he's in a hole. He's in a really deep hole, 1-4 down. And this is where we normally see Rublev go into self-destruct mode. But fortunately, he didn't that particular day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, is it too early to talk about the smash? I think
No, definitely not. We've led up to that. I mean, we're now basically in the narrative. We're at 2-4, with now, or 4-2, I should probably say, because Rublev gets that monumental
because it
hole.
was, yeah, sorry, of course, because it was just the one break point, of course, wasn't it? It was just that,
Yeah.
unreturned serve.
Just that unreturned, but there was another point in the game. I think it might have been the advantage Rublev, which is also an interesting one where I think there's an unforced error from Holger Rune, and we're going to get to an even bigger unforced error from him in a second. But
Yeah,
there's
it was
probably
there's another one where he was in the ascendancy in the
in the
rally, wasn't
ascendancy,
it?
yeah, and I think he puts a when he puts the forehand long. Do you remember that forehand we just had a look at? It was certainly
Yeah.
in this early period, and he puts a forehand long that you talked about his shape and his balance during that rally and on the final shot when he's probably the guy who's 60-40 up in the rally, but he goes long with a forehand. And again, that's the thing that helps Rublev hold serve in this such an important game.
Yeah, my kind of analysis of it basically was going to say it was, and again we'll flesh this out, but he goes for a forehand inside in, and he's just a little slow to get round it. The legs are just not quite getting him
Well, there you go.
far
Maybe
away
that's
enough from the ball, and
maybe that's fatigue. Maybe
we it's pretty. I think there's a few factors that would suggest it was fatigue. It goes 4-5. Rublev has to win the game to stay in the match to possibly win the title. And then that first point, 0-0, you're like, well, I've got to win this point, otherwise the odds of me winning the title, winning the match, whatever, drastically reduce. And what does he do? I'm pretty sure Rune comes into the net. The approach is okay. So Rublev's got a little bit of time on his forehand. And for all the world, you would pause it there and you would 100% expect Rublev to hit a forehand passing shot because it's his best shot. But with all the pressure on, he just kind of caresses the ball with his forehand over Rune's head. And it's this great clarity of mind. It's not the kind of thing you would expect to see from Andrey Rublev, especially under pressure. And it's actually a beautiful shot in a very, very high pressure moment. It's a bit underrated there, John.
What a piece of magic.
The two lobs are actually quite different in the way that they come about and also the way that they're executed. One was kind of a bit more of I think the first one, which was arguably more sensational, but to me, at least watching it back just now, didn't seem to be a classic topspin lob. It was just unbelievable precision. From a fairly tricky situation where maybe it was the more impressive shot in some ways, but because he probably didn't have so many options, it almost makes the second one more impressive, especially when your brain can be fried in these particularly tense moments, that he actually just does a more classic lob and executes it perfectly with also the classic scenario of Rune just, when you're playing, but you also know when you're watching, and it's like, oh, that's just landing in. There's just absolutely nothing I can do about it.
I'm
Rune has that look on his face,
I'm cooked, exactly. And it's one of those, it is one of those ones, especially watching it back there. I was like, if Rublev had put just a bit too much spin in that, he would be screaming his head off right now. Why did I play that lob? Oh my God. Like, chance at a forehand pass. But of course, it was beautifully crafted. So the complete opposite was the reaction. He was very happy with it. Holds to love, loads of momentum there. And then we go to 5-0 and that's where the game was won. Basically, that's where the game set match happened. And it goes left 15 and Rune plays a perfect combination of shots to put Rublev under all sorts of pressure on the backhand. Rublev skies the ball, and Rune tries to get back for a smash, and he's just a little too slow. And it's a very, very makeable smash. Very makeable smash. You're talking like 90% of the time the player wins the point from there.
And it goes from love 15 to love 30, and of course that changes the dynamic of the game incredibly, as you know, Jack. That 15 all, and it's advantage server, so to speak. But love 30, and everything is different. But that just one thing on that rally, there was some really good defense from Rublev, so that has to be recognized. But he doesn't really do a lot wrong, really. Sometimes we see certain rallies when you're up and you're probably a little bit too cautious, maybe. But there was a forehand that just preceded. Those that have watched a million matches, you can imagine, you to get the smash in the first place, it's because you're just often gradually eking up a bigger and bigger advantage in the rally. That's exactly what happens. He's now got, I think, a short forehand to attack, or short ball to attack, which he does so with a forehand. Does the right thing, and it's not that cautious. It's not like he goes down the middle with that. It's quite close to the line, but Rublev does incredible with his anticipation, gets a racket on it. And actually, even then, the smash is pretty easy, but it's not like 99 out of 100 smash. It's a 9 out of 10, if you like, that he should still do it. And he does put it in the net, and it's love 30. And yeah, I mean, the rest is almost history, right?
The rest is almost history. Yeah, he does get broken there. The other 2 points are a bit loose as well, aren't they? So it's nothing too spectacular.
But it's the 5-all game that we've just been talking about, which is love 15, love 30 with that smash that Rune probably still thinks about to this day. And by the way, I think the final point of the game, the final one, the nail in Rune's coffin, if you like, is a double fault as well. So it's just a pretty horrible game from Rune's perspective. But
that's a little more. It's a little more significant, I think, at 5-all. Actually, that it does feel that now. The comment I made on the double fault, and the whole point was, the smash he was a bit too slow back to. The double fault, he skies the second serve. It's a little too long. Doesn't put enough topspin on it. All of that suggests there's a problem with the legs, and obviously we saw it throughout the year. It was a big problem for Rune more than once. In fact, very frequently. He plays Munich the following week. Absolutely dies in the final, but fortunately his opponent was riddled with nerves. Botic didn't quite go over the line, so he did manage to survive 4 match points there. And then the same thing in Rome. Medvedev kind of took the legs from underneath him, another final, but couldn't quite make the same thing happen. Although that's a little different, that one. That was that was a Medi special.
You mentioning those finals, by the way, Rune's season actually is quite paper thin, from being a roaring success to didn't quite follow up Paris-Bercy. We're not pressing panic buttons or anything, and there's still, we saw it in Paris-Bercy and Turin again. He makes the ATP finals. It tells you he's had a pretty good year. So it's not a complete, it's not a Taylor Fritz, for example, where showed a lot of good stuff in 2022 and just hasn't backed it up. It's sort of, let's say, paper thin between being a roaring success and didn't quite hit the heights of Paris-Bercy.
It was definitely didn't. It was a not quite. It was an almost season. And let's look at it from Rune's perspective for a bit. This would have been a really nice title to win. And actually, Munich is the only title of the season. It's very underwhelming. It really is. And he should have won this one. He probably does feel pretty bitter about it. He had a lot of chances, and for it to be a physical issue in the end, which it did look like. He's going to be. He definitely was beating himself up about it. I think I remember him talking about it. In the presser, and kind of being like, this one really does sting. It's it's one I really should have won. He does care a lot about it, and probably the biggest loss of the season, I would say, not just because of the scoreline, but just in terms of the stakes. I think
and 4-1 up and chance for double break and all that.
Yeah, it just felt like Rome was never really in his hands, the way Medvedev played that day, and that was the other biggest match of the season. I'm trying to think if I forgot anything, John. Where did he get in the French?
I mean, the French Open was a kind of a battle against his body from start to finish. He was sort of on the verge of going out in a couple of rounds, certainly, and then he does eventually succumb to Casper Ruud fairly meekly. But
it was a bit of a collapse.
Yeah, if you said before the tournament that Rune's losing to Ruud, you'd probably be a bit surprised, despite the fact that happened in 2022 as well. But once he got to that round, the minute the match started, I think Ruud breaks very early. And
every pundit and their dogs had, I'm pretty sure Ruud winning prior to that match because of the previous match. Rune had played Cerundolo. I think it went like whatever it did in the fifth, really, really long. And everybody was like, his legs are going to be gone again. We'd just seen it in like 3-4 previous tournaments. There's a recurring theme here. And it's been the story of Rune's season. A few losses to Novak as well at the tail end of the season, where both times you kind of feel like he just lost it a bit in the third set. Super close, but again, that's the only thing that made a difference. That's going to be the prevailing storyline going into 2024 for Rune. But more importantly, of course, because the winner here, the reason it's on the list, Rublev. This is
Does it make the list if Rune wins the match? I don't think it probably does.
Probably not. No, probably not. It's not a first Masters title.
Especially if he wins it. Especially if he wins it like 6-3 in the third, as he threatened to do, or 6-2 or 6-1.
It doesn't. It's more about the narrative. And okay, yes, I think there will be folk maybe who argue it's because it didn't make an impact, I guess, on the rest of Rublev's season. He didn't beat those 4 players, as you said, at any point. Maybe it's not as big a deal. But I think the fact that it is like a little diamond in the rough of a season, I think it's poignant, given Rublev as a player, as a fan favourite, and everybody's going to be like, well, at least he's got Monte Carlo. At least
and he's a guy, by the way, that may now go on to win 3, 4, 5. But he's also someone that could have potentially ended on 0 if he doesn't get over the line here. It's almost like Sabalenka with Grand Slams. I actually do think she'll be a multiple Grand Slam winner now. But if she'd had her year this year and she hadn't closed it out against Rybakina, you'd be starting to worry about her, and another one, and so on and so forth. But Rublev closes it out with. Nice. He is up 40-15 in that when he does finally get over the line. So that makes that a little bit easier. It's not like you get a juice game or even have to save some break points. But from the bigger perspective now, if you're a neutral observer, as I largely am with this match, but when you see him go to the ground and you see how much it means to him and his speech afterwards, it does warm the heart. And he's a guy that now will probably, as I say, go on to win 3, 4, 5 big titles of various, denominations perhaps. But, the longer that drought had gone on, the more you'd have been, he'd be picking up, just imagine in 2024, he picks up a couple of 250s and it'd be like, that's Rublev. Whereas at least he's got the 1,000 now. And it does matter if you've been there, seen it and worn the T-shirt when it comes to winning these big titles, because you do draw on that experience when you're in the tough moments, whether you're Novak Djokovic or Arina Sabalenka or now Andrey Rublev. I heard Sabalenka and Djokovic talk about it a lot during 2023 about how they do draw on. It's like, I had match points slip away before. It's okay. It'll be all right because I know I can do this. Is sort of the mantra. And I think Rublev will feel that if he's in a sticky situation in a match that he could and should win in a 1,000 final.
I think that's a huge point you're bringing up, John, because I suppose the closer here is going to be, what does Rublev do in 2024? And you're right. Certainly in this level, it was a big deal. Still is a big deal. He cares a lot about it. We saw that in Shanghai. I don't think he sees it the same way as maybe your Novak. Pretty much just Novak is just like 1,000s, whatever. I got 40 of them. I think he is still a big deal for players like Andre for sure. And if that's one of the main goals, great. It's not the main goal, but if that's one of the main goals, he's in with a chance. Because you're right, if he hadn't won this, I think the belief would be waning. And well, it is, because the bigger question is, of course, can he win a Grand Slam quarterfinal?
So the Cilic one that certainly springs to mind in Paris that he'll probably be quite annoyed about more than most. I mean, there's been 2 or 3 against Novak, I think. So Did he did all right in the Wimbledon one, actually, to be fair. And he got a set in that Wimbledon. I think it might have been the first set at Wimbledon. But Rublev, bigger picture 2024. Probably he has a similar year to what he had this year. He probably may well win another 1,000. He might not, but he might win a couple of 250s and 5, and he may well finish the year top 10 and make the ATP finals. He, of course, will want more than that. Yeah, and if the draws, by the way, it's mostly about the draw. He could get a nice draw and being I mean, him and Casper Ruud, I don't think there's a huge amount of difference. Some people who are bigging up Andre might say he's the better player and the more talented one with the higher ceiling. Maybe Casper Ruud fans would disagree, but I probably would actually go slightly towards Rublev. So Rublev gets Casper's draw. Maybe he's in a 1 or 2 Grand Slam finals. Others might argue that he doesn't have the temperament that Ruud has, so that might go against him. But
yeah, the 2 chances he's had really were Tiafoe and Cilic. Yeah, and
matches. No, I wasn't at the Cilic match. I was watching that with Owen on a big screen in the environment in the grounds of Roland Garros. But I was actually at the Tiafoe one, and yeah, he didn't show up for that quarterfinal.
Let's be honest though. To be brutally honest, I don't think Rublev really. I genuinely don't think he wants to win a quarterfinal. I think he wants to win a slam. I think he's still thinking,
and it's partly that ambition, Jack, that I feel manifests itself in this frustration. None more so than in the ATP finals of last year when he's playing Novak Djokovic on arguably the most perfect conditions, even better than Wimbledon or Rod Laver, for Novak Djokovic to win a tennis match, and he's 4-all in the first set. And he makes a couple of errors, but nothing crazy. And he just has a meltdown. And you're thinking, that perhaps those ambitions, in yours and my eyes, are probably slightly bigger than they could or should be. Of course, sports competitors will say you've got to be ambitious and that's what you've got to aim for. But I think he, somewhere in his psyche, and rightly or wrongly, thinks that he should be getting to Grand Slam finals and at some point winning one. You and I might say that actually this is where he's at, and that's an unbelievable career. But yeah, go on.
It's probably as good as it gets. It's probably as good as it gets. In fact, the best way to frame it is at this point in his career, with what he has now, this is as good as it gets. His game is not better than Carlos's, Daniel's, Novak's, and Yannick's as it stands. There's always potential. There's always room for improvement. There is room for improvement. I should say that his second serve is still incredibly weak. It's a part of the game that Novak in particular has bullied every time they've met on a hard court. And of course, I think 2 of the quarterfinals this year were Novak, right? So that's case in point. Straight sets both times. Oh, no, of course, yeah, sorry, won the first set in Wimbledon. The point is, yeah, he got bullied in that department. Again, the forehand is big, but you can't just hope to smack the ball through these guys, particularly Daniel, again, who just gets under his skin pretty much every time they meet. He has beaten him a couple of times, but again, US Open quarterfinal this year with Medvedev. Point is, as you say, you could get a kind draw at one of the Grand Slams next year, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to beat one of these guys in one of the matches you play if you're hoping to win the tournament. So winning a Grand Slam next year, unlikely unless he makes some big improvements. Which he'll be striving to do. He's obsessed with this game, maybe to an unhealthy degree, but he's absolutely obsessed with it. So he'll be doing everything he can.
Jack, this might be as good as it gets, but if it is, we'll always have Monte Carlo. Andrey Rublev, a Masters 1000 champion. Jack, big thanks. And
thanks, John.
I'm sure our paths will be crossing very soon. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.